Welcome to another episode of The Shift with Elena Agar. In this conversation, I am joined by Trina Celeste. She is a trailblazer in the tech industry with over 30 years of experience advocating for women in tech and pioneering work-life integration. Trina shares her journey from co-founding Tech Moms to authoring a transformative book inspired by her mission to empower women. The book is called Orchestrating Life Work Harmony. Definitely check it out. The link is in the show notes. She also has a really interesting analogy around the garden where goats represent energy draining people and situations that require firm boundaries. She also has this innovative lawns model, which applies to plant care principles to personal growth, covering key aspects like relationships, financial freedom, and mental health. We'll also discuss the intricate balance of life's interconnected elements from financial wellness to efficient work environments to breaking free from a culture of relentless productivity. So join us as we uncover these topics and more. And as always, like, subscribe, comment, share, and just let me know what you think. Trina, welcome to the Shift Podcast.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
I'm very excited to be here with you. I have your book right here for people who are listening. It's a picture of Trina and a goat on the front, and we're going to talk about the goat today a little bit. It's an actual goat, not like greatest of all time goat.
No, it's a
But
very different goat.
yeah, very different goat. But I absolutely am excited to dive into some aspects of this book, and I really I mean, you've really hit on a nail on so many different levels in this book about, you know, we're going to go into the details. I don't want to give it all away right away, but I'm curious, what inspired you to write a book? Where does your career, how did you become an author? Talk about Tech Moms. I'm curious,
Okay.
just your career story.
Yeah, I've been in tech for 30 years. So my background is in technology. I did my computer science degree in 1996. So I was kind of early entry into getting into it and actually wrote my thesis paper on why women should go into computer science. And just looking around the room and going, why am I the only woman in the room? Right. And
Mm,
it just always kind of was like, what's going on? I can see the opportunity here. Why is nobody else here with me?
mm,
And so for 25 years, I worked for large scale enterprise software. My background's in, designing, developing, and implementing large scale enterprise. So CRM systems similar to like a Salesforce. And I worked for companies, Novell and eBay and Oracle. Had this really long, great career, but with on the side of my career and all the opportunities I was benefiting from being a single mom, working, trying to figure all this out, trying to live my own sense of balance, which is why I figured out balance is bullshit. You just cannot do it. It doesn't exist. That was part of my own lived experience and started seeking to figure out how do I, how do I actually do this? And that's where I got the idea for orchestrating. It's more of an orchestration of harmony, and you really have to put your life first, not your work first. And so my journey took me through out my career, really getting involved in women's organizations. I led as the global president of women in IT at eBay, and I oversaw an organization of 1,500 members in 17 countries. And I saw similarities, I mean, across the globe, right, of the same challenges that we're all trying to figure out on how to orchestrate between our personal lives, our work lives, and especially for women, we deal with some really difficult challenges that just our male counterparts just don't have to deal with, right? And so, really, it's been a 25 years in the making book. People ask me, how long did it take me to write the book? I'm like, 30 years, basically. But it's 30 years of lived experience, or running organizations and seeing and hearing and feedback of the challenges that were being addressed. And then towards the end of my corporate career, I had been running a program that was coding camps for employees' daughters, which was really amazing. And what I started to see is not only did the women get engaged, but my male counterparts started coming to me and saying, "Hey, Trina, this is amazing. My daughter's going to have to deal with this stuff." I'm like, "Yeah, it's not just the colleague you don't care about, it's your actual loved ones," right? Which it now became very real for them. And one of the things they said to me was, "Well, what about my wife?" What about my sister? I have a neighbor that's dealing with this challenge, and I realized we have this huge disconnect in um, the career opportunities that women just don't know how to get in. Because I'd had them coming to me and saying, Trina, I want to get into tech. I just don't know how. I hear there's all this opportunity. I don't know how. Um, and so I created and co-founded, I have two co-founders that are on my team, Mikkel Blake and Robin Scribner, and we founded this organization called Tech Moms. And Tech Moms is really founded in not just technology, but it is a huge shift in learning, how to access, getting the community networks that are necessary to build your career, just building that confidence. And as I have been running this organization now since 2020, a lot of what is in this book are what I saw the challenges that a lot of our students were facing as they made this shift from I'm giving to everyone else all the time. I'm putting everybody else's needs ahead of my own and then trying to make this career shift, and you can't keep doing all of that and focus. You need to put yourself first. So a lot of the analogies that we'll talk through as we get into kind of the detail in the book are really focused on how do I put my life first? And that's not a bad thing. It's not being self-centered to be centered on yourself, right? It's really saying, "Hey, I've got to put the air mask on myself, give myself some breathing time so that I can then enable others better." And so that's really what the focus of the work and where the idea and the meaning and the purpose for me came in writing this.
I love it. One of the things that really stood out to me, so I'm in talent development space, as my audience knows, and so
Mhm.
I work with a lot of individuals and globally as well. And what I haven't really seen that much out there is something that you bring into this book, which is looking at it from all different sides. And that's what I appreciated so much in this book, because not only are you working at career or like well-being, you're looking at relationships, you're looking at finances, you're looking at making space, you're looking at environments that are around you. And I love that, because I mean, in my life as well, and I'm sure a lot of people that are listening, it's learning how to recognize the goats. And I want you to talk about the analogy of the goat, because I think it's important here. um, and just recognizing who's taking what's taking
Mhm.
from the person that you're trying to become, the purpose you're trying to live, and so on. And a quick other note, what I also loved is the every chapter almost has this, like, here, take a moment and pause and write these things down, like
Yeah.
actual actionable things. So I love the holistic kind of approach to creating that harmony in your own life. But talk to me about the goat. What is
Yeah.
the goat?
Let's start with the goats because that's the funnest. Who doesn't love to talk about goats and Barbies? Those are like my two go-tos. um, so the model and I really tried to simplify what can be very complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
Life is complex. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but give a framework that allows you to take these concepts and go, oh, they're a goat. Oh, they're a gardener, right? So the idea comes from centering yourself in your own life's garden. And I love the garden analogy because we're trying to bloom the right things. We're pulling weeds of doubt, shame, fear, guilt, right? We've got all these internalization things that we've got to do within our garden. But one of the most important things is that within our garden, we have those four areas we talked about where we have relationships, we need to focus on our finances, our work, and our personal development. We're constantly orchestrating across all these areas all the time. But to protect all those areas, we need to set up fence lines. And this is the boundary work, which I know everybody, it's been a big topic on like setting boundaries, but I like to call them our fences around our life's garden. Because what you're trying to keep out are the goats. And these are not the greatest of all time. In fact, most people that I've met that think they're the greatest of all time are true goats. They're energy consumers, right? It's those that will take from you and give nothing. And when I was growing up, we had a goat named Casper the unfriendly goat. And I tell some stories about these goats growing up, but I remember growing up, all of our goats, if you didn't shut your fences and you didn't control those fence lines, they would consume everything in your garden, no questions asked, right? and just really having to protect ourselves from those goats. And there's a lot of them that I go in to to the goats that we're keeping out and protecting ourselves. It takes work. You cannot be nonchalant about it. Um, those that have toxic friends that you get on the call and they just complain the whole time, guess what? They're draining your energy.
Mm-hmm.
You have financial goats where you're not budgeting or saving, or people are draining and taking, right? You've got to protect and save your finances that way. Or you have the bosses that will just consume you and give you tons of office housework and never give you the big projects that will help develop your career. You've got to keep those under control and maybe find instead the gardeners that will then help you plant and bloom and develop you and invest in you and are interested in you. If you have a goat boss, you've most everyone's had that goat boss. You can name them. Like everybody I know's been able to identify that person. But if you can say, okay, they're not going to invest in me, they're not going to bloom me, I need to make a change. And it's us having the courage to do that and taking control of our life and being aware of who's goats, who's gardeners, what am I going to bloom, what's my vision, and setting that up.
Hmm. You know what else is interesting is that even in the actual goat situation, they're trying to get into that garden, let's say, not because they're trying to do something bad, they're just doing themselves. They're just doing them. Like, and I think
Exactly.
that's the same in life, is like these people, it's not even about you. They're just doing what's best for them. It just happens to be that you
Yeah.
are the person they're taking from.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
critical conversations, sometimes that can be easily adjusted, right?
mm-hmm.
I have a kind of funny analogy, but this is um, a true thing that happened. So I was working with one of my tech moms, and I was coming up with this model for the book. And I was talking about our life garden and everything we just went through, and our goats and our gardeners. And she went home and actually told her kids about this model. And she told me, she's like, I got a call from the school principal one day, and she said, my son was in the principal's office. And she went in and he said, your son is talking about he's got a goat in his garden and he's got to keep him out because he's a bully and he's bullying his and was talking goats and gardeners to the principal. And he's like, what is he talking about? So, it's like you start to see them in your life, even from a
Mm-hmm.
young age, talking to kids. I'm actually going to probably write a children's book around this because it's
Yeah.
teaching this concept. We need to teach about protecting yourself. And you're right, it's not intentional quite
Mm-hmm.
often. People aren't, I mean, there are those that are seeking to come after you, but more often than not, they're just trying to do what's best for them. And so recognizing that and having a conversation, it gets a lot easier when you do the work within the book to say, here's my vision, here's what my purpose is, here's what I'm trying to do in life. Then you can go to some of these people that are consuming you and say, like, this is what's important to me and what I'm trying to do. How can we work better together? It creates better conversations, right? And
Mm-hmm.
being able to explain why this is consuming you, it's draining me. Can we do something different? Like, can we work together differently? It can be with your spouse, it could be with your kids, and just identifying where it's not working so you can have those conversations.
Something else you mentioned in the book, and it's something I think about a lot lately, is creating space to just be, to just be still and kind of think about your life, think about what you want, and to be intentional about it. Because I think we get so busy living and doing, not even living this sometimes, like just doing. And I think about it a lot because I wonder, if I'm in my 20s, because I feel like I'm 37 and I feel like it just now clicking. I'm like, oh, maybe I should like think about things, Like I feel like
Yeah.
it's only in recent years. And then I wonder, if it would, if there's I feel like maybe there's a period in life where it's beneficial to pause, because I feel, and I'm just curious your thoughts, because I feel like in your 20s I see value of just doing and experimenting, because if you pause at like 22, I'm not sure if at least the 22-year-old me would have been like pausing with any kind of purpose. Does that make sense? Like, because I don't even know anything at that point, like quite yet. So I'm curious if there's like, like, is there a time like that, is it based on experience? age? Like when is it useful to pause to the point that you're talking about in the book?
Yeah, I don't think it's age dependent. Like I said, even I think right now, especially with the challenges we're dealing with anxiety in children,
Mm, yeah,
I
good
think they
point.
need a pause, right? I think there's a power in the pause at any age, at any time, at any moment of going, hey, I'm in disharmony. I need to take I call it a timeout. That's what I call it in the book.
Mm-hmm,
I need
mm-hmm.
to put myself in timeout. Just like a naughty child, you're like, hey, I am not okay. Something's just not right. You can feel it. You know something's wrong. Step out. Just take a moment, even if it's 5 minutes. When I was working at Oracle, I used to have what I call these meeting marathon days. And it would be like, how do you do 13 meetings in a day? Seriously, it was unreal.
Mm-hmm.
There were times where I would just be like, "Okay, you know what?" And it was the middle of COVID. I would just step away from my desk. I'd walk outside and I'd just stand in the sunshine for like 30 seconds. Just in between a meeting and just be like, "Okay," like and just give yourself space to do that. I mean, 30 seconds is probably not enough, but it was all I had, you know. So you just find it where you can, but you do need to be, there's different ways of meditating or creating that space. This book actually, and the model I came up with was because I gave myself that space. Um, I had been trying to figure out the model, how to communicate it in a way that people would understand what I was thinking and all these things that we're trying to do. A lot of books talk about the juggling and the glass balls and don't drop. And I'm like, that just feels I don't it feels tensious to me. Like,
Mm,
even going from the word balance to harmony feels better, right? Just the word in itself. And I was like, "Well, how do we incorporate this space that we need in our lives for ourselves?" And being able to reflect. And I was in the intentional the tune-in moments that I put at each chapter were very much part of that model. So I had been biking at the gym. I was just like, okay, I was trying to write. I took a break. I went and just was like, I'm just cycling at the gym and was just reading another book actually. And it just the whole model just came to me. It was just like, and I had the space in my mind and not doing a bunch of stuff or forcing it sometimes
mm.
to step back and go, there it is. And I remember I took the other book I was writing and I flipped to the back and I wrote the whole model out at the back of this other book. And sometimes things can't come to us if we're filling all of our time too much. And so in the book I have this model called the Lawns model. It's LAWNS. And it came from like 6th grade science class of what it takes for something to grow, right? We need light, we need air, water, nutrition, and space. You need that space in your life. And so I equate that to the light is our relationships, the air of financial freedom. I can breathe because I'm not dealing with the financial. You need to water your work life. You need mental health and the nutrition that you're going to put into your life from a mental health and wellness. That's the soil from what everything else grows. And then spacing, creating the space for it to grow. So it's just really kind of putting those models of thinking about what might be preventing me to grow. Is it my relationships? Am I putting enough in my financial investment and time? Where is it I might be lacking? And it's different for everyone,
Mm.
right? Everybody's at a different place, and that's okay. It's just being able to give yourself time and space to be able to identify what those things are.
Yeah, and that's what I really, really appreciate in this book is because you focus on that nutrition, the financial wellness, because we tend to forget that it's, for anybody who's listening who's ever been broke, and I've been there before, it's like it's very difficult to care about anything else. You
Yeah,
have to, you know what I mean? You have to be in a situation where you feel secure. It's the basic needs, right? Like
security.
you want to feel that security. And if you don't have money or you know what I mean, your business is failing, like it's very difficult to function beyond that. And I think we forget that. And sadly, they don't teach us financial literacy in schools. Maybe they do now in some capacity, but and I think that's such an important piece because then that all connects to nutrition, because what do most of us do when we stress and so on? We opt out to poor food choices, or we can't afford a healthier option, or we think we can't afford, we don't have enough brain power to educate ourselves about healthy choices because that's just not a priority because you're in survival mode. So it's like, how
You're in
can you
survival.
be,
Mhm.
at your top?
Yeah. It's interesting as you go through the 4 areas, right? Your relationships, your finances, your personal development, and your work development, your career. They're all tied together. They're all orchestrating between each other, and that's why
Mhm.
that orchestration is so important. Because if you're upskilling or developing your skills in your career, guess what? That's going to translate into higher income and leaning into your career, right? Not avoiding your career. So that leads to better financial wellness. It gives you more opportunities. It gives you more space to be able to do things that you like so you can get more personal development time. Your relationships become different. They all are additive. And so if you're neglecting one area in your life, guess what? It's going to have impact everywhere else. And so it's finding enough time um, in each of these areas. And why, for me, not just because I came up with this model, but I live this model. Sometimes they say authors write books for themselves. I totally believe it because I live this every single day, right? Of, okay, today, living with intention and what am I doing in each of these areas? And what's priority for me? And sometimes I'm heavier on, like, today I did a training, I did school, and I'm doing this podcast and I'm doing another one. Like, some days are really heavy, right? And then other days it's like, okay, I'm going to give myself some space to be able to heal and kind of reflect. And so I'm intentional in finding those spaces throughout my week or my month or however I need to be able to be successful overall.
Mm. I want to kind of go back to something you mentioned earlier because it's another topic that I think about quite often being in the corporate world. Um, the idea of being in meetings all day, because what you are, or just the way organizations are structured today, right? And you work with a lot of professionals and in the workspaces. So the things you're talking about is something an individual is has some control over, right? Like all those things that you're
Oh yeah.
creating that harmony. But my thought is that, and what I see at least, you can have somebody who is a top performer who's doing all those things right, but then they're put into an environment that is completely, just ineffective, inefficient to a point of, people
Mhm,
are spending 6, 7 hours a day on meetings and they're still supposed to know how to manage people. They have to make time for their team members. They have to actually do productive work. So I'm
mhm.
curious, the disconnect between organizations and how we best functions and how organization can best optimize their employees. It's just there's a
Yeah,
huge disconnect. So talk to me a little
there
bit
is.
about that. Why
Yeah,
does that happen?
there's a whole other book here. In fact, when I was writing this, I was like, okay, I had to make a decision. Like, who is my audience when I wrote this book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and initially, I was going to do a corporate life first harmony book. It's on the backlog right now. I'm like, okay, I've got this one, and a lot of these key points that you're talking about are how can you run an organization to be a life first organization? Because not many of our organizations do that right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things that I would do, or I have coached some of the leaders that I've worked with over time, is to give those breaks in between. So instead of an hour meeting back to back and at 45 minutes, within your meeting, have an agenda and outputs, right? Because then you can become very efficient. Otherwise, you're just meeting for the sake of meeting, and then I have to have another meeting because we didn't reach our goals, right? Somebody's got to be regulating those meetings and making sure you have the right stakeholders there. You have um, all of the right agendas in place, and not just meeting for the sake of meeting, and creating that space to actually get the work done. That's just one, right? That's just one idea out of hundreds on how we can make adjustments to create more space and time and create higher performing teams. Because the back to back really is not effective. It's going to burn people out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm curious, as you maybe have when you coach these individuals, especially leaders,
Hmm.
I think collectively we understand that that's not the best way to function as humans. Any thoughts of why we keep doing it?
Yeah, because there's so much pressure to perform, like from a
Mm,
deliverable, right,
mm-hmm.
perspective. Um, I just ran an executive network event retreat this last week, and it was really interesting. There was probably 80 executives in the room, C-suite levels, and talking to all the different personalities, it was pretty dominant of the feeling to always be filling your time. A few of the executives really had a hard time with like free space. What do I do? I need to, what are some ideas on hobbies or things I can do? I'm like, well, why not just meditate and take some time to reflect? You don't need to always be doing something. And I think that's a cultural, like when you've been really driven to build your career, that's what you've done. It's what you've done to get there, right? Not realizing that that's not giving the space to be able to work more efficiently when you can step back and be like, okay, what can I do differently? Within the book, I talk about like a stop, start, continue. Like, what do I don't need to be doing this anymore. It may have gotten us to this point, but I don't need to be doing that anymore. Let's stop doing that. Maybe start something new that we can adjust, or, you've got to kind of get that space to be able to do that. But it was interesting that just how many people had a hard time with that, of just, okay, I'm gonna step back a little bit and just create that space for myself.
Mm. I think there's this, to your point, it's cultural, but also it's almost like guilt. Like
Mhm.
you should be doing something,
Yeah,
but it's
that's
counterproductive
really
completely.
it's really interesting right now because 'cause I'm doing a lot of work in AI. And
Mm.
what does AI do? It makes us more effective, so we have all this time. Guess what? We feel like
Mm-hmm.
fill it again. Why? Like, if we're more effective, we're more effective. Let's give ourselves some more time in the other areas of our life, right? If I can if I can do my job and become as effective, let's not time bound it. Let's do it based on results focused,
Mm.
right? Let's make sure we're focusing on that. If I can become more effective, and yes, we can probably add some more work things in there, but let's give ourselves some, like, hey, I've freed up a little bit more time. I can maybe leave a little bit early and go spend some time with my kid, whatever that might be, um, to be able to take on some of those. One of the other things that came up this week is like finding more purpose driven initiatives within your organization that people can get involved in. And guess what? That has an uplift effect for your organization. When you've got employees out in the community, you're getting free marketing, right? So I think that there's other ways we can be spending our time rather than just within that, tying in some various initiatives if we get more effective in our delivery. It's kind of a fun challenge, right? I would say challenge, opportunity,
Mm.
in the AI space right now.
No, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of AI. Sign me up. I'm every
We're
tool I
all
can
in, right?
find, every tool I can find. I'm like mind blown at how much time it saves me. Um, in your work, and kind of around this life work harmony, what has been you feel is the hardest challenge for people like to overcome, or maybe top two?
I think when we were talking about the internal barriers, our own internal minds are our biggest challenge. It's not external. The fear, the doubt, the shame, the guilt, the internal work that happens, and that's another reason to create that space for meditation, is really recognizing that those are influencing us, influencing our decisions. A lot of living in fear. I see that a lot, especially with women. And maybe I'm making decisions based out of fear, based on prior things that had happened to me. So I'm limiting myself. And so I think the internal work is the hardest. It really is. And I think that's a lot of reason. I'm going to just take a leap here. I think that's a lot of reason why people try and fill their plates so much, is because they don't want to focus on what's going on the inside, right? That's hard to face sometimes. And so, but it's probably like the most freeing thing. One of the meditations that I started doing, um, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, and I wasn't thinking about it, but just as I started to learn this concept of meditation and taking a step out and thinking, I started, um, this sounds really strange, but meeting with myself, like visualizing myself on a beach.
Hmm.
It's dark, and I don't know why dark, but I just felt safer for whatever reason in an evening beach with a beautiful moonlit, and I'm talking to my younger self.
Mm.
And we sit on the beach and we talk. I know that it sounds odd, but it's something about communicating with yourself. And somebody later told me that that's you working with your inner child. I'm like, I don't know where it came from, but it just
Mhm.
comes from within, right? Like whatever it is you need to solve for within your life can come from within you. And as you have those types of conversations, if you will, imagining, talking to yourself, it's like you can do a lot of healing work, a lot of things that have come up of like plucking, like a lot of fears that I was dealing with, a lot of self doubt. I can catch it easier now. Once you start pulling those weeds and identifying them and going, I call it pluck it and chuck it. Like get rid of that. It gets easier and easier the more you do it. Just like, weeding your garden. If you let it go, it's going to get overgrown, right? And become unwieldy, and you're not going to want to do it. If you do it a little bit at a time, it gets easier as you
Mm.
go.
Absolutely. How does physical health and nutrition play into this harmony?
Oh, physical and mental and emotional are all tied. Right, and I'm a huge, gym rat, I'll just put it that way. And it's really, some people, early on when I've really started getting into physical activity, I've always been very active, and that's just been part of me. I've made it part of me, which is great, but I got really introduced into it in my early 40 when I turned 40. I was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease in my lower back. And it got to the point where I couldn't bend over to pick anything up off the floor. It got really bad. And I went to the doctor and they did a scan and they're like, you have the back of a 60-year-old. And I'm like, well, I'm 40. And
Mhm.
they're like, you're on the way to having to have back surgery. And I'm like, I do not want to do that. So I started getting into weightlifting really heavily. And what I found was that not only did it help with my physical side, I started really being aware of my nutrition. It made it easier to focus on my diet because I didn't want to mess up the work I did there. Like, so they tie together. It makes it easier when you're doing both.
Mhm.
Uh, but it started to have a lot of impacts on my mental state. And you don't think about that always on like when I'm physically good, I get those endorphin rushes that help me throughout the day. And so I would go to the gym before work and I just would notice the difference in my interactions with people and how I worked with others. And my kids were funny. They're like, on days when I was bad, maybe a little snippy and ornery, and they're like, "Mom, did you not go to the gym today?" They started to notice. Like, I'm like,
Ah.
"Oh, shut up. Oh, yes, you're right. I didn't. I didn't make it today." It does it you can start to see it,
Mhm.
there's tangible benefits across all areas.
Mm. No, absolutely, absolutely. Feel the same with my partner. I'm like, can you please make sure like he has to go to the gym? Like otherwise it's not like I sense it. I'm like, oh my God, please go. You need to let
Yeah,
all that energy out, not
yeah, like,
here, over there.
yeah,
So
take it out on the gym floor, right?
exactly,
That's
exactly.
right.
Yeah. My audience knows I'm super biased and I'm a gym rat myself. And it's a savior in many, many ways for me. So,
Yeah.
um, I'm curious also, as you are delivering these kind of sessions and so on, has there been pushback from people when you coach them or when you do like pushback around the creating that harmony? Other like what are the excuses maybe, or do people challenge you on some of these things that you talk about in the book?
I don't think they challenge me. I think they know that it's the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the timing and building new habits is hard.
Mm.
You know, the biggest thing is like, okay, a concept. And what I found is like this is a book, and just having discuss this with my readers, it can be really heavy to consume, and it's really hard to do the inner work. Sometimes it's so what I would say is do a chapter or two at a time. Don't
Mm-hmm.
try and like some books, it's not like a novel. This
Right.
isn't a go read it in 2 days and then, oh, everything works. I wish it worked that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's a continual habit and you could go back and do it over and over again. So what I did, because some people are like, I loved reading it, I loved reading the stories, but now I want to go back and do the work. I want to go through the questions. I want to process. I want to do that work for myself. You've got to set goals for yourself to do it
Mm-hmm.
and make it happen. And just be like, okay, I'm going to spend 15 minutes today on this chapter, and then I'm going to do another one tomorrow or next week, whatever, just set goals to say, okay, I'm going to process this. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to reflect on it. I'm going to become more aware of what's in my life, what might need to change, and just do the work. So, with that, because I was getting that feedback, I did two things. One, I created an Audible and it's on Spotify because listening to it, and repeating it, it's a whole different experience, which is really cool. Um, and then the other is I'm publishing a workbook that's just the questions.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just do the journal side of it and in addition. So we've got some things in works that'll will help with that.
Yeah, and I loved again the point to like pause and like answer, because I think the hard part for a lot of people, myself included, is like a question, like, are there any projects you're floating around in your thoughts that you want to put into action? And in my head, I might be like, oh yeah, this is, but when I went and like try to write it down, I'm like, well, what is it really? So I think when you're forced to
Yes.
write things down, you're like, oh, like I don't, is it though? Is that the thing I want to do? And it either clarifies like, okay, this is right, really, like, no, I don't know what I'm talking about, because it's easy to think about things, but it's very hard to actually put it on paper. And
Oh yeah.
I've spent thousands of dollars on coaches, and some of these questions are still hard for me. you know I've spent a lot of time answering some of these questions in my sessions with my coaches, so,
Yeah.
and there, to a point that it's, to your point, that it's a book that you go through in pieces, but I think by the end of the book you will have a much clearer understanding of who you are, what you need to look, who are your goats, who are your gardeners, and what you're
Mhm.
looking to get out. And what I find, Trina, is that at the end of the day, it's like, this is it, like, this, if there was a magic pill, this is it. But
Yeah.
it's the things, the mindset, it's our own worst self. So it's like, if we just
Mhm.
give ourselves a chance to go through some of this and to be honest with ourselves and to make the hard choices, I think,
Mhm.
like, I'm always mind blown when I talk to guests and I read books of my guests, and and I'm like, why aren't we all living fulfilled
Yeah.
and at our top? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
And harmony doesn't it I think one of the biggest mindset shifts is harmony is not something you arrive at,
yeah.
right? And I think with balance, it feels that way. Like if I'm not balanced, I'm imbalanced. And this is harmony is more fluid. It's like sometimes I'm gonna feel it, sometimes do not, and that's okay.
Mhm.
Um, I wrote this book while my father was going through cancer. And a lot of the book and a lot of his stories came as I was driving him back and forth to radiation sessions or editing in ICU units, right? And on the Audible, he actually recorded my about the author, and then I lost him last fall. And it's interesting, as I've looked at this and reflected on my whole experience in writing, like having and saying this vision of mine is important and I want to finish this book. I know I need to finish this book, right? Like it was really challenging. And at the same time I wanted to be there for my father. And it didn't mean that I was feeling perfectly happy the whole time, right? But I was able to feel like, okay, I'm making progress on something that's important to me and I can be there for my father at the same time, and I'm orchestrating those two things together.
Mhm.
And, some of my relationships had to pause for a moment, like, with my kids and stuff because I was doing these 2 other things. It wasn't like it didn't not exist, but just not at the level it normally does.
Mhm.
So you're kinda stepping back from some things and bringing in other things, and you're constantly moving your life to where it needs to be at that moment. And it's not about how you necessarily are at a place of happiness and perfectness. It's a place of I'm in control and I'm doing what I need to do for me right now. And that's fulfilling, right? That brings harmony.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, really genuinely, I absolutely loved going through this book. It's just, it's, it's the one that you would just have on the side of your desk and look back to from time to time when you need some reminders. So really well done, like beautiful done. I read quite a bit, and it's just, it's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
Um, Before I ask you my last question, where can people find you? Where can they get the book? Where they can reach out to you?
So trinaceleste.com. So TrinaCeleste.com. I've got my book. You can order direct from there, or it's on Amazon. And it's also, like I said, Audible and Spotify books. It's on most Audible platforms. And I'll be releasing uh, the workbook this month as well. So that'll be
Nice.
coming, but feel free to reach out to me through my website or book time. If you need coaching or there's anything I can do there, feel free to reach out. Would love to work with you.
And I'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes as well for people who are listening. And the last question I ask all of my guests: what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Am I in harmony? Right? Like just being aware of where we're currently at and why or why not. I think just that one question helps us identify where we need to make adjustments in life.
Beautiful. Trina, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me. This has been wonderful.